I don't think they've ever used progesterone itself in a study in humans. Going back to the 40s when progesterone was just barely becoming available, people were using it to treat cancer in humans, but it was just on an individual basis. And there have been quite a few publications using medroxyprogesterone, stuff which is not progesterone, to treat kidney cancer and breast cancer and such. And it works somewhat, but it isn't progesterone and doesn't have all of the good properties of progesterone and has some of the bad properties. So the best information is still from animal studies, and even those pretty much faded out after Lipschutz left the field in the 50s.
I thought I remembered one with women who had cervical cancer where they were injecting progesterone. That was that progesterone?
It was just a few women. That was real progesterone, but it was only a few women, and they were just they had diagnosed them as being incurable, and so they were willing to see what happened. They weren't trying to cure it, and they had people. They photographed and felt the condition of the cervix at the start, and then they injected what they thought were big doses, but they never mentioned that any of the women were anesthetized, which happens when you give a big dose. Mm-hmm. So we don't really know how much the women were getting because they were injecting it in vegetable oil, which is an unpredictable solvent. And so if they weren't getting anesthetized to any extent that anyone noticed, they were hardly getting anything more than a physiological dose, but still during the course of the study they saw a great improvement in the appearance and feeling and symptoms. The bleeding decreased, the lumpiness decreased, and so on. It looked less like cancer after a few weeks of treatment. But since they didn't do the experiment intending to cure cancer, they went ahead and cut out the uteruses after a certain number of weeks had elapsed, and concluded that progesterone had no promise as a treatment. The article is mostly interesting for the weird conclusion, and then the article published right next to that in the same book was about treating breast cancer with estrogen, and as many of the patients got worse as got better with the estrogen, and they concluded that this stuff has great promise. And those two articles published right against each other are most interesting for the degree of psychosis that goes unnoticed in medical science.
Mm-hmm. And maybe in our society in general. It's funny, you were pointing out the dominance of the estrogen industry over the last couple shows, and I was thinking that's kind of analogous to the dominance of estrogen in the sick person without the progesterone to oppose it, and it seems like the same thing is happening in our society, which indicates to me that there's something wrong.
This one study I think is still going on. I think his initials are D.G. Stein was the leader of this study, giving progesterone within the first 24 hours after a catastrophic head injury, and finding that the people survive when they get estrogen and recover remarkably well instead of just progressing to dead.
So it's very effective, as you said, for any kind of injury. stopping excitation?
Stops edema and excitation and deterioration of any tissue, but especially noticeable in the brain because edema is deadly in the brain. And
as Ray pointed out in the last few shows, that it's not a money maker, to put it simply. Progesterone is not patentable. Perhaps you could. I mean, you said they've tried to alter the molecule some, so they could patent it, but those artificial progestins, they call them, actually have estrogenic effects.
Either estrogenic or androgenic, or in some cases glucocorticoid effects. And just recently, I saw an article emphasizing the difference between the real progesterone and the medroxyprogesterone that was used in the Women's Health Initiative study. And this person was sort of sounding annoyed that people were making the confusion, but I don't know how influential that publication will be.
And the medroxyprogesterone is actually what's called a progestin. If you're taking hormone replacement therapy, you think you're getting progesterone, but you're probably just getting progestin.
Yeah. It's similar enough to progesterone that it turns off your own production of progesterone. And the odd thing about real progesterone is that if you aren't producing enough of it and you take some, you produce more of it. It reinforces the system for its own production, just exactly the opposite of what the synthetic progestins do.
I see. On the same subject of cancer, somebody brought up the point that the Craig B. Thompson, president and CEO of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, has something on YouTube where he discusses new ways to think about cancer and how cancer arises in humans. And I'm going to accept this call here. He concludes that at the end, that if you overfeed someone with fat, you do not increase the rise of cancer at all. If you overfeed someone with carbohydrates, you dramatically increase the cancer rate. And protein is halfway in between. And this person would like to hear your response to that.
Oh, I haven't read it, but I've seen a couple of other things that I think are equally crazy. Gary Taubes has an article in Science about a year ago saying basically the same thing, which I think he got his idea from Dr. Lustig's video. But I have read lots of studies on the subject, and going back almost 90 years anyway, I think the evidence is very clear that fat is the main, unsaturated fat is if not the only, it's at least by far the largest promoter of cancer, not just in humans, but everywhere they look. And the interesting thing about carbohydrate is that the fats that we make out of carbohydrate when we eat an excess of it are anti-growth of cancer. They lower the amount of the unsaturated fats circulating in our blood, and they have a shift effect on the metabolism of cancer cells. They tend to restore oxidative metabolism and suppress aerobic glycolysis, which is the characteristic cancer metabolism. So this guy, he might have some bit of evidence in mind, but if he doesn't mention the 99% of the overwhelmingly opposing evidence, there's something wrong with his presentation.
Yeah, he doesn't distinguish between fats. He just says fat and or carbohydrates.
Well, one of the ways they trick the experiment so it looks like they can improve their sales of fish fat or whatever is to give the most toxic fat to the control animals and their test substance, such as fish fat, to the other animals. And the fish fat happens to oxidize so quickly that it doesn't reach the cells in quantity as great as the seed oil does. And if they're feeding a comparison between fat and sugar, for example, they'll make sure to add the carcinogenic required amount of linoleic acid to the diet, so that then the sugar all goes into storage, but the animal is still being exposed to the crucial carcinogenic amount of linoleic acid. I've looked at probably 150 articles that claim to have results of that sort, and they're all, it's hard to imagine that they weren't designing it just to get the results they want.
Well, we should probably get back to that. In a minute, we have a caller on the line. Gene, are you there?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I should listen. I didn't listen before I called in. So, hi. A couple of questions, if it's okay. One, I tried. I haven't eaten much dairy food for many years, and I've been trying your diet, and I started drinking milk, whole raw milk, and my sinuses got stuffed up again. Is there any?
What happened?
My sinuses got clogged up.
Oh. Well,
I've always had that problem.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend whole milk or raw milk unless you're familiar with the particular cows. And if you get a bad result from one dairy or one cow, then try another one that feeds the cows something different. I've felt the difference myself just between local dairies and in a supermarket. There was one brand of milk that was always cheaper and tasted a little funny, and I always got sick when I drank it. And there are so many things that can go wrong. All milk except whole milk, and maybe even that now, but the government requires the addition of vitamin A and D to all of the commercial milk supplies. And those dairies don't like to tell how they add those vitamins, but generally there is some diluent that the vitamins are carried in, probably an emulsifier, so that they don't stick to the sides of the vessels or float to the top. So
well, this milk was from a local organic raw dairy, raw milk, with the cream mixed in. And I've had the same problem drinking or eating dairy from many different sources throughout many years. I seem to have the same response, whether it's from store-bought or, right from the cow or whatever.
Yeah, do you get that from cottage cheese or cheese?
Yes.
Or from goat milk?
I don't like goat milk. I don't like the taste of that. So,
it's undoubtedly some kind of digestive problem, but it's just a matter of experimenting. Different kinds of cheese. Have you noticed an effect on your sinus symptoms?
Yeah, usually, once in a while it doesn't bother me, but most of the time it does. I don't have any digestive problems, just sinus, and and my lungs I get mucus in my lungs as well, or I cough up mucus.
Well, how the mucus gets there is that your intestine is being irritated, and the irritation is either that you have bacteria growing on the food, or the food itself contains allergens. And very often, just by changing the dairy or the type of cheese or cooking it rather than eating it raw, you can find which things cause the mucus reaction. But it isn't that the milk gets into your blood and causes mucus production in your head or lungs. It's a reaction from your intestine.
Oh, okay.
Hey, Gene, could you stand back from your microphone or talk a little softer? You're a little too loud.
Oh, okay, sure, yeah. I've been working with Lita Lee, and she suggests that I drink cream instead of milk to solve the problem.
Drink what kind?
Cream rather than milk.
I've never heard of anyone trying that, but I would say try some homemade skimmed milk cottage cheese first.
Okay. All right. Is that better, John?
That's a little better. You can even back up more because you're coming. I think because you're so close, it's very loud.
Okay. Well, thank you. My second question is, I have a relative who's been diagnosed with chronic superficial gastritis, and also inflamed duodenum. What would you suggest there?
Have they been checked with an endoscopy for bacteria, or exactly what the condition is?
This was through they through a colonoscopy and also through the throat.
And did they find that they had any bacterial problem growing up in the duodenum or stomach?
I believe so, but I'm not positive. He's had severe stomach pain for 2 or 3 years. It's been getting worse and lots of diarrhea.
It's good to check things like the thyroid, but also to consider an elimination diet. There are so many foods, even natural fresh foods. You can rank them according to their likelihood to support bacterial growth. And then there are lots of food additives that are definitely, anything with carrageenan, for example, it's causing a lot of cases of inflammation of the stomach, bowel, diarrhea, constipation, and carrageenan is showing up in an incredible number of foods, everything from organic whipping cream to squid patties.
Okay. We'll work on that. All right.
Anything else, Gene?
Not at the moment.
All right. Hey, Ray, hang on just a sec, Gene. Is there any use in sneaking up on the milk consumption, just doing a little bit at a time?
If a person thinks if they think they might have a problem digesting the lactose or any food that's chemically different, then if you drink 2 or 3 ounces at a meal, that exposes the intestine to the new chemical, and in a week or two, or at most a month or two, the enzymes usually will express themselves, even though they might have been gone for years. You can usually induce them in a few weeks by these small samples, just a half a glass at a time. So there's not enough to feed the bacteria significantly, but enough to sort of tickle the enzyme system into getting active.
I actually started with just a couple of ounces a day, and as soon as I did, I had that response.
All right, and what about? Were you going to ask about the enzymes, Gene? We talked about that on Monday. Was that something?
Oh, yeah. As I said, I've been working with Lita Lee. I guess you know her, Ray.
Yes.
And she has recommended I take a number of enzyme supplements. Are you familiar with those?
Yeah, but I'm very cautious with any kind of a pill-shaped supplement.
Me too.
In the process, there are so many allergens that can enter. So anything that's especially involves microorganisms, you want to be very cautious. A couple of people have told me that when they took the pure free amino acids, that they got incredibly sick, and you have to be really cautious and maybe take a half a tablet as a trial and wait three days or so just to make sure you handle it. The same with any supplement. Vitamin C supplements can cause terrible problems for people. I've seen people who had terrible sinus symptoms for years and years, and when I just suggested they lay off their vitamin supplements for a week, they didn't ever have a runny nose again.
Not too much of a testimonial for vitamins.
Yeah, for a while I was counseling at an alternative health place in Eugene where allergies in the summer, because of the grass fields around Eugene, allergies were a big problem, and for a couple of years I had a reputation for curing everyone's allergies by getting them to stop their vitamins.
Wow. Yeah.
Are you familiar with Lyme disease and any connection with that and thyroid?
Yeah, hypothyroidism is often misdiagnosed as Lyme disease. Candida is the other thing that is commonly, if you can't find the cause, then Lyme disease and Candida are the first suspects, but usually it's just hypothyroidism.
What if you test positive for Lyme?
Well, lots of people do. There's some overlap with other, we all tend to be exposed to spirochetes, and there's overlap with other spirochetes. And a course of antibiotics for a week or two is a way to eliminate it. The Lyme disease can be eradicated just as syphilis would be, for example. But by avoiding looking for other causes such as hypothyroidism, some doctors make a good business out of the Lyme treatments forever.
Yeah. I've been working with a naturopathic doctor who he recommends, antibiotics for the initial onset of Lyme, but then mostly herbs. What he says, I guess a number of people say, is that the antibiotics force the spirochete to create a hard shell around themselves, and they go into the shell, which is why the symptoms desist after antibiotics. But then over time, the spirochetes break out of the shell and migrate around your body, especially in joints and stuff, which is why people experience joint pain years after the initial onset of the Lyme.
If they haven't eliminated an endocrine problem, what I see is that the hypothyroid people with low immune function also get the whole range of symptoms that are blamed on that, such as arthritis. And if you can cure the disease by correcting the thyroid, it's a lot easier. About 40 or 45 years ago, a friend of mine had an accident working on his house, and the stress of it apparently brought on severe arthritis, and he went to his doctor, who examined him and didn't prescribe cortisone for his arthritis. He prescribed Armour thyroid supplement because he saw he was hypothyroid. And my friend was really annoyed, went home grumbling. The doctor had fixed something that he thought wasn't broke. And in a week or two of taking the thyroid, his arthritis disappeared and never came back. But not many doctors are aware of connections such as injury, stress, arthritis, hypothyroidism, and most doctors would prescribe at best cortisone to treat the symptoms. But I think a lot of the Lyme doctors are doing a similar thing, making a simple problem complex.
Ray, is it possible that the bite from the tick triggers some anti-thyroid response?
Probably low thyroid people have a bigger inflammatory response and probably are more likely to fail to throw off the infection.
I see.
So if you have the diagnosis, it's good to take a course of antibiotics, but antibiotics, a good combination of antibiotics, it's well established as a cure.
I see. All right. You have another question, Gene?
You're starting to break up again.
Oh, how is it now? Is it still terrible?
It's thirdly.
Okay. Well, let's see if it corrects itself in a minute. Gene, whenever you move around, there's a huge amount of noise, too, on the radio. So
I can't understand what you're saying.
Okay. Let me. I'm going to reconnect the call, and we'll start over.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. All right. You're listening to WMRW LP Warren. This is a special wacky fundraiser show with Dr. Raymond Peat. Ray's not wacky, but the technology is I'm using Skype to try to do a call-in show. And it's our fundraiser, so if you'd like to contribute to WMRW, you can go to WMRW.org and click on the pig.
Hi.
Hey, we're back.
Okay.
And Gene, are you still there? No, we lost Gene too. So the phone line is open again, and I should repeat it. It's 802-526-2326, 802-526-2326. If you have a computer with Skype in it and you're sitting in front of it, you can also Skype John Barkhausen. And we should probably open the line up for some other people. Oh, Gene's back. Hey, Gene?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have another question? We should probably see if somebody else wants to get into.
Sure. Go try someone else, and if they don't, I'll come back with another one.
Okay, great. Is the streaming working all right?
It is now, yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Well, we'll talk to you probably in a little bit.
Should I stay on, or?
It's better for the noise level to not be on, because every little noise in the background distracts.
Oh, so I can listen on the radio and then call in if no one else has.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks. And so you think Lyme, Ray, has an initial infection that can be affected by antibiotics, but most likely it's not the cause of the tiredness, and somehow it's triggered hypothyroidism. So we lost Ray again. On hold. Hello? This is WMRWLP Warren with a series of mess-ups. Calling back Dr. Raymond Peat, who's a PhD in biology and has done extensive research.
Hi.
Hey, Ray.
Yeah.
One more time. This could get old, but... So I was just asking, so you really think Lyme disease is just a thyroid problem that's triggered by the immune?
No, not the disease, but the diagnosis. I would say 80 or 90% of the people that I've talked to have been to doctors who specialize in diagnosing it and treating it chronically.
Mm-hmm. I see. And have you had luck treating people for Lyme?
Yeah, well, no, but they get well.
I see.
and forget about the Lyme diagnosis.
I get you. So you give them nutritional advice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think...
And the power of undigested food is very underestimated.
Can you explain that?
Well, overcooking food, like people used to do 100 years ago, it's much better for the digestion because we aren't designed to eat undercooked or raw vegetable matter. Bacteria can eat it, and if someone happens to have just the right mix of bacteria, their bacteria can eat their vegetables secondarily and release some of the nutrients. But if you get the wrong bacteria, then they produce toxins rather than nutrients.
And that's the endotoxin problem that you've referred to.
Yeah.
Which basically poisons your system and taxes your liver.
Yeah, endotoxin and many other things, allergens released from the specific plant material as well as bacterial toxins.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if we discussed this on the air before, but it's always amazed me that you talk about endotoxin all the time. If you look it up on the internet, there's a lot of information about it. It's a real thing. It actually causes severe problems, and that seems to be well recognized. But I've talked to several doctors, internists about it, smart people. They've never, ever heard of it.
I guess they forgot that section in medical school during a generation or two. But in the 19th century, the intestine was a big focus of Anglo-American medicine and some other European varieties, but especially the English and Americans were very interested in what the intestine does to the whole system. The brain-intestine symptom interactions and the other organs as they're influenced by the intestine. That was still pretty big up until 1920, and there was a campaign against it. Walter C. Alvarez, a newspaper enterologist, helped to suppress the intestine culture in popular medicine by for example, there was a belief that migraines or headaches in general were produced by toxins absorbed from the intestine. And he was of the new school that didn't want to think about the intestine so much, even though he was a gastroenterologist. So he stuffed wads of cotton into his medical students' rectums, and reported that the next morning a certain proportion of them had headaches caused just by the pressure in the rectum. Mm-hmm. He said, so you see, headaches are caused by pressure, not by toxins. But he didn't put any toxins in his students' intestines, so he didn't disprove the idea, but it was just a little propaganda bit. Mm-hmm. But the other people, Russians, for example, studied in more detail that, in fact, toxins, nutrition, and pressure interact very meaningfully. In an experimental animal, for example, they would put a balloon in the intestine and blow it up, and nothing would happen. The animal would keep functioning. But if they gave the animal hypoglycemia and then blew up the intestine, unpredictable things would happen all through the rabbit. It would have hormonal and neurological reactions triggered just by that pressure of blowing up a balloon in the intestine. Could cause seizures or wheezing or all kinds of widespread reactions.
And that's when you have low blood sugar, that's when it's particularly dangerous to have blockages?
Yeah, and French and Canadian researchers, instead of using pressure, they combined allergens. They would feed a bit of walnut to an animal, and it would maybe sneeze from the allergens in it. Then they would give it moderate hypoglycemia and feed it the same thing, and it would die in shock. And then if they would give another bunch of animals slight hyperglycemia by infusing some glucose and feed them the same walnut or whatever, they wouldn't even sniffle.
Wow. So that goes along with what you said, that sugar or glucose is protective. So it's very important to keep your blood sugar up.
Yeah. I think the particular researcher who did that was named Adamkiewicz, and it was published in a book by Yasmin, Jasmin, Gaitan Yasmin.
And why was Alvarez so opposed to the research that was done in the 1800s? I have a book of his, and he seems like a very reasonable fellow. But
he was very entertaining and intelligent, but he was just a modern that wanted to get away from the old-fashioned country doctor who cured everything with laxative.
I see. And so, as long as we're on the subject of digestion, how important is it that people have regular bowel movements?
I think the person who popularized fiber 40, 50 years ago in the U.S. Was studying the African relative freedom from bowel problems, cancer, and he saw that they typically would have 3 bowel movements a day, and that they ate lots of potatoes, and that it was the fiber in the potato stimulating the intestine that seemed to protect their bowel. So he published things about the benefits of fiber, and the cereal industry in the U.S. started selling oat bran as the preventive of colon cancer, which caught on in the 70s. But then in the 80s, some Australians tested oat bran diets on animals and found that it increased the incidence of bowel cancer. Apparently by the nature of the breakdown products.
Yeah, I don't think that knowledge has ever gotten around.
Not very well. But in general, fiber does clean the intestine, and keeping it moving lowers the estrogen reabsorption. The bile puts out, tries to get rid of toxic materials, including estrogen. And if you don't have a regular movement through the intestine, a lot of that gets recycled, reabsorbed, and raises your general exposure to toxins, including estrogen.
All right. Well, that's a good answer. I better get to some of the questions that have come in by email. I keep thinking we have so much time because it's a 2-hour show, but if we have any more mess-ups with the phone system, it may be a short show. So let me get to these questions. There's one here from Keenan asking, what do you think of medicinal marijuana as in its relationship to cancer and AIDS? Is it efficacious, if I can say that?
It helps with the nausea. If a person is having symptoms and can control the symptoms with it, it's very effective for many people. Mm-hmm. And the tea, when I was 10, a doctor gave me a bag, didn't say what it was, but prescribed a cup of tea every day. And years later, I recognized the taste of it as marijuana. But
really?
it was supposed to prevent my headaches, but it didn't do anything noticeable for me. But it used to be prescribed a lot as a tea, and I think it's a lot safer that way than smoking it, because the smoke itself is carcinogenic and estrogenic, and the various chemicals in the leaf are themselves slightly estrogenic or anti-androgenic. So I think that's probably the main concern for someone who's using it regularly. But I think there are other probably healthier solutions for nausea. The anti-serotonin drugs and simply increasing the blood sugar, salt and sugar, very often help with nausea.
Okay, well, thanks. We have another caller on the line. Roger, are you there?
Yeah, hi.
Hi. Yeah, this is Ray Peat on the line with you.
Hi, Dr. Peat. Thank you for taking my call. My question centers around omega-3 fatty acids. A couple years ago, I came across a supplement that of whole fish oil, of salmon fish oil, that contained omega-3s, and it was touted as being a great supplement to help arthritis and lower triglyceride levels and that kind of thing. And then I read your research, which sort of contradicted all of these things that I was hoping that fish oil would do, like save my, a great antioxidant and reverse my aging process, probably about 20 years. But I was wondering if you could elaborate on what you found and explain what you think the dangers are of taking supplements of fish oil. Because I've been seeing that these fatty acids, the omega-3s, are showing up in all kinds of organic products like organic milk and baby formula. And it seems kind of dangerous to me if there's a problem with the supplement.
Yeah. Someone 2 or 3 years ago analyzed the baby formulas and found that the great bulk of the omega-3 fat that had been added to it had broken down and was probably in a toxic form. So their worst feature is that they break down and oxidize very fast. And a couple of researchers have looked for them in the blood at the time that they are having their anti-inflammatory actions, and found that they had already broken down, but just between the mouth and the bloodstream, they broke down into completely new chemicals, which were what accounted for their anti-inflammatory effect. But those same breakdown products are what, in the long run, suppress the whole immune system and have a lot of other toxic effects. So the short-range anti-inflammatory effect I see is analogous to the anti-inflammatory treatments they used to give with X-ray or other radiation.
Yeah, what would some of those other effects, negative effects, be other than?
Well, the whole immune system gets turned down so that it doesn't produce the inflammation that's bothering you, but in the long run that makes you susceptible to all kinds of infections. And I think in the long run it increases the risk of cancer and all of the age-related degenerative processes.
Do you think it would be important to continue to monitor people, mothers, nurses, all of us who are using these omega supplements to see if we have this effect?
A few people are doing that and warning about their increased use. It seems like a very bad idea to put it in powdered baby food, because the time and oxygen exposure before it's eaten, it just does a terrific job of degrading those fats because they're so unstable.
Yeah. What should we look for as a symptom that this is a problem? More infections, more colds.
More infections would be the first thing. I've seen that in experimental animals, and there have been some studies in people in which their immune systems were relatively inert against various organisms.
And go ahead, Ray.
With the anti-inflammatory X-ray treatments that they used in the 40s so enthusiastically, it took from 10 to 15 years before they saw the harmful effects of them.
And what can we do as consumers to alert or to get other doctors such as yourself to maybe conduct additional research that supports your theories? I have called various manufacturers of the product and milk companies who are using the product, and they assured me that everything was completely fine. But
yeah. It's the same with the additives they're putting in so many products. Like the fumed silica, silicon dioxide that you see in vitamin pills and drugs and even foods, and titanium dioxide and so on. These things are proven risky at best, but you talk to the companies that use them, and they don't want to think about it. They'll respond to sending them an article indicating that they somehow selectively misread the research incriminating the material.
Right.
It's hard to counter someone's occupational commitment to something that isn't helpful.
Mm. And Ray, maybe you can explain why it's come about that, I mean, I don't know if there's a short answer to this, but why it's come about that most of society in scientific culture is invested in these products that actually, although they might help inflammation in the short run, cause cancer in the long run. How did we get here?
The whole idea of science has been shaped by commerce and the military. The people who have something very powerful to gain from using science in a certain way support it being used that way. And the people who are trying to be objective don't have any ulterior motives, and that means they don't have a source of funding.
Like there are minority views in science about issues like this, and my understanding is they just can't get published.
Oh yeah, and have you looked at some of the controversies in other fields of science, such as Halton Arp and his quasar astronomy?
No.
He was successful in his career as long as he published his pictures in his atlas of odd galaxies. As long as he just said, "Here's odd stuff I've been finding."
Mm-hmm.
But when he pointed out some very orderly things that related the redshift of quasars to the redshift of galaxies that they were clearly part of, they said, "You can't use our telescopes anymore." Even though he was funded by taxpayers' money, they wouldn't let him use the public telescopes.
Yeah, I guess what I've become aware of doing the show is that there are scientific dynasties, just like there are dynasties in other fields and commerce, and people get to the top of their career, and obviously I think it's just human nature. They don't want to be, they feel like their own reputation and status is on the line if their theory ends up being proven not to be true.
There's a little, maybe a 1 or 2 minute video bit of Halton Arp talking about his experiences, and actually quotes some of the things that happened to him on his way out of the profession. Very ridiculous things that the top people in the field said and did.
Wow.
Well, this sounds like it would be ripe for the Science Channel to do a documentary on some of these contradictive things. But thank you very much. I'm going to hang up and listen to you guys on the air.
Okay, thanks for calling, Raj.
And I'm contemplating having dinner and then going to the bathroom after that.
Yeah, thank you for telling us.
Good night.
Good night, Raj. All right, the phone line is open, 802-526-2326, 802-526-2326. Or if you have Skype on your computer, you can Skype John Barkhausen, all one word. Let's see. Have you ever seen the article, Ray, called, I think it's called Against the Tide, and it's about minority views in science and the experience of several scientists. We have another caller coming in. I'm going to take that. All right, you're on the air.
Hi, this is Justin. I was wondering if Ray could elaborate on any misconceptions he thought science might have in its view of the immune system.
All right. Thanks, Justin. Let me just say before you start, Ray, I just got to say this is WMRW-LP Warren. Okay, sorry.
That was about the immune system?
Yeah, Justin, you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Can you repeat that again?
Any any misunderstandings you think science might have in the way it views the functions or the interactions of the immune system?
Yeah, I think the best answer to that is to look at the articles by Polly Matzinger and Jamie Cunliffe, or Cunliffe, Cunliffe, and Polly Matzinger. They, I think, they are inspired by the thinking of Elie Metchnikoff, who was contemporary with Ehrlich, the magic bullet drug person. That the German view of the immune system is the one that was profitable to the chemical drug industry, looking for a magic bullet that would kill each kind of germ, and then by extension applying it to the cancer, looking for chemicals that would kill cancer cells and not human non-cancer cells. But Metchnikoff took a totally different approach to the immune system, the developmental, nutritional, morphogenic approach, and that didn't find any commercial sponsors, and it was the French-Russian orientation that actually was the biological orientation rather than the industrial. And so the place where his ideas are well summed up, the alternative idea of the immune system is in these papers by Cunliffe and Matzinger.
Okay, great. Fascinating stuff. And if I could have one follow-up, I'd love to hear Ray. I'm always very interested to hear him talk about the dead universe theory and biological fields, so I'll hang up. If there's anything he'd like to go into on that, I would be very interested to hear it. Thank you, Ray, and thank you, John.
All right, thanks a lot, Justin.
The which universe theory was it?
Justin, you gone? I think he said bio-universe, but I'm not sure. Are you having trouble hearing, Ray, on your end?
No, I just didn't get what kind of universe he said.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't want to speculate. Could it have been dead universe?
Oh, possibly. I can. Well, for example, if you want to look at another controversial video on the internet, Wallace or Wall Thornhill has some things on the electrical cosmos. I think his website is thunderbolt.com, if I remember.
Okay, that sounds interesting. We have another caller. Are you there, caller?
Oh no, this is Justin again. I was just going to clarify. I was just talking about the notion that the universe was dead and inert, and most of biology was just kind of that nature. Do you understand what I'm saying, Ray?
I still didn't get the word. There was a bubble, right?
Oh yeah, he was saying that he was wondering about most of biology looks at the universe as being dead and inert and not a living system. Okay, yeah. The field idea in biology, embryology as the model, developing according to its interactions with the environment, that idea continued. Some of the people who were developing experiments on trying to understand the rules by which an organism takes form, some of these people were vitalists who believed there was something extra besides the matter, but at least they were interested in the actual events as the organism took form.
and they were knocked out of biology by the gene people, who I would say are on the side of an inert cosmos. They want to explain things in terms of essentially immaterial information, and they're the ones who talk about the vitalists wanting to introduce a vital principle as being somehow against the materialism of science, but the genetics people really want to depreciate the material world in favor of an information world, and the idea of the central dogma was that the information that we have in our genes is immortal and can't be added to, and it can only be written out into mortal, temporary, imperfect organisms, but it's the timeless stuff. So really the calling people like Driesch a vitalist and saying that they weren't really biologists, it's kind of self-referential, because the genetics people have thrown out most of the interesting stuff in biology until the last 10 years or so.
When they're starting to get back to the field theory again.
Yeah.
Did you get that, Justin?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Okay.
And I'll hang up so someone else can get a question.
Okay, thanks a lot for calling.
All right. Bye.
All right, and the number again is 802-526-2326. And I do have some questions here. We get to them before we get busy. There's one from Brittany asking, if you are trying to self-treat for hypothyroid based upon blood tests and symptoms, how much T4 would be considered too much to take? And is T4 even necessary at all?
The problem with the commercialization of synthetic T4 that started in the late 40s was that they tested it on male medical students who are about 25 years old and selected for good health, and they found that it worked in them just like the real thyroid substance that had been in use for about 40, 50 years at that time.
Yeah.
And the trouble is that it then became commercialized, and women have at least 5 times the incidence of thyroid problems because of the antagonism between estrogen and thyroid. And the thyroid sluggishness that's so common in women shows up as a slow metabolism of the liver. Typically, a woman premenstrually will get drunk on a fraction of the alcohol that it takes to make a man drunk, because the liver is slowed down by the antagonism between estrogen and thyroid and oxidative metabolism. And it happens that thyroxine has to be activated in the liver by taking off one of the iodines in the right position to make it the active hormone called T3. And so if women are having already low blood sugar symptoms or high estrogen symptoms, things that are the result of hypothyroidism, then T4 can very often not help or even make the problem worse. Some experimenters they were trying to argue that thyroid does something other than rev up the oxidative metabolism. So they took slices of muscle and kidney and liver and brain and heart and added thyroxine, T4, to these cultured slices and saw that the liver had a tremendous burst of oxidative activity, but the kidneys didn't do much, and the muscles didn't do anything, and added to the brain, it actually suppressed oxidative metabolism in the brain. And so they said, you see, oxidation isn't what thyroid really does. It just happens that the liver responds that way. But they were looking at the pre-hormone. The liver has to turn it into the active hormone before it can work in the muscles, kidneys, heart, and brain. And what it turns out that the brain concentrates, the blood can have 40 times as much T4 as T3 if your liver is a little sluggish, and your brain will still concentrate the T3 to the point that it has a 1-to-1 ratio. And so if you put the brain slice in a dish where it can't get a new supply of T3 constantly, the added T4 can't do anything except displace some of the active hormone that the brain had been concentrating at the 1-to-1 ratio. So adding T4 to the brain in the culture dish, it caused suppression of metabolic activity. And in people, you very often see it causing neurological symptoms, strange electrical sensations or ringing ears or worse memory, various things that are really signs of worse thyroid function. So
it sounds like T4 probably is not, you shouldn't be taking very much of it, if any at all, especially if you're a woman.
Yeah, it's very good if you don't need it very much.
So a lot of people take a mixture of T4 and T3, supposedly close to the physiological dose of 1 to 5, I think it is.
Well, the gland, if you take a human gland or a cow gland, it's close to a 4-to-1 ratio.
Okay. And is that a good mixture to take if you were supplementing your thyroid with it?
Yeah, even a 5-to-1 mixture is okay. But the people who were insisting on still using the Armour with its 4-to-1 ratio in the 1960s, as the pharmaceutical companies developed tests for diagnosing thyroid, they started noticing that the people who were taking thyroxine had maybe a 40-to-1 ratio of T4 to T3 in the blood, but the people who were taking Armour had maybe a 10-to-1 or a 5-to-1 ratio. And so they defined the people who were taking T4 as the normal, and the ones who were taking Armour as having too much T3. But most doctors at that time weren't aware at all that T3 was the thyroid hormone.
Oh, I see. So they jumped to conclusions, and we're still stuck with some of those conclusions.
Yeah, one of the ideas that spread quickly in the late 1940s, when the first blood tests for thyroid came on the market around the same time as Synthroid, the T4 product. It was the protein-bound iodine test, and where people like Broda Barnes had seen close to half of the population benefiting from some thyroid, which used to be part of the meat supply until the agriculture department said the meat companies could no longer sell it. But in Broda Barnes' time, he saw that somewhere between 20 and 45% of the people benefited from taking some thyroid. But these new blood tests in the late 40s found that 95% of the people had a fairly high level of iodine bound to protein in the blood. and that created the only 5% need a thyroid supplement idea.
I see.
But then by the 1960s, new tests came about, and they realized that the protein-bound iodine test had almost nothing to do with thyroid function, really nothing to do with thyroid function. So the standard that still persists widely, that not only 5% of the population is potentially a candidate for supplement, the basis for establishing that had nothing to do with the thyroid function.
Yeah, I'm beginning to see that that's a common problem in science, is that basically conclusions get set in stone and then they never get revisited again.
Yeah.
Lilia asks, there was a follow-up question to that last one. Let me just get that before I move on, because I'll lose it. Hang on a second. Let me find that. This is also... hang on just a minute. Oh, here it is. Yes, it was an undigested food question. If you tend to constantly have excessive air, chest pressure, or feeling the need to burp, is that a sign of low stomach acid with undigested food causing problems, or too much stomach acid? And what would you do about it, if you have any idea?
Basically, no. A lot of different things can cause that. Some people can actually have reverse peristalsis. When you analyze burps, most of the time it's air that you've swallowed coming back, just plain perfect air. But sometimes you find other gases, such as methane, coming out in burps. And Walter Alvarez, one of the interesting things he demonstrated was that it's pretty common for people to experience very intense reverse peristalsis. He put some lycopodium powder in his medical students' rectums when they went home for the evening.
I'm beginning to get the idea that I wouldn't have wanted to be in his medical class.
And he had them fill out a questionnaire saying whether they typically experienced morning breath. And then when they came in the morning after getting the lycopodium powder, he took a swab in their mouth and found lycopodium powder in the mouths of the ones who typically had bad breath in the morning.
Wow. That's a little grim. I hope they didn't have girlfriends or boyfriends. So, but you think most of the time the air is just from the burping is just from swallowing air, most likely?
Yeah, in the daytime. Most of the reverse peristalsis happens in the night.
All right.
If you're low thyroid, your autonomic nervous system tends to rev up, compensating for the low oxidative metabolism. It pushes it harder to increase your adrenaline in particular. Some of the other things, histamine and serotonin, go up too. But the adrenaline tends to stop the forward propulsion of the peristalsis, and then random signals, irritation from something in your intestine, can probably send waves going both directions. And that probably is more common when your digestive system is slightly paralyzed by a very high adrenaline level.
Yeah. All right. Sheila asks, what are your thoughts on multiple sclerosis? What causes it, and how do you think it should best be treated?
In the 70s, I saw a series of 5 people over a period of just maybe, a year or two, I think, and as they told me their symptoms, I said that sounds like classical hypothyroidism, and a couple of these people went to their old-fashioned doctors with a list of what they had just told me that their symptoms were, and said, "Here are my symptoms. What do I have?" And the doctor said, "Hypothyroidism," and gave them thyroid. And that series of 5 people in a row, every one of them discovered they didn't have multiple sclerosis, but rather just needed a thyroid supplement.
The same person asks, and this is definitely related, why do I feel bad after I accidentally took too much desiccated thyroid? She increased it a little too fast over the course of a couple weeks. And she actually managed to get some raw thyroid from a butcher, which is interesting because that's something I've been trying to do for a while unsuccessfully. And she would like to know, how long does it usually take for the thyroid to get back to normal when you stop eating it? And is there anything to do about it getting to feel better quicker?
Well, people probably worry too much about it. The T4 has a half-life of 2 weeks, and T3 in different people can have a half-life as short as 1 day. And so if you were getting a sudden overdose and your pulse went up to maybe 150 beats per minute at rest, in 48 hours, probably you would have lost at least half of your T3, which is the active stuff, and your liver would then be putting out just sort of a disposal amount, converting the T4 to T3. So usually, if you took so much that you had a very fast 150 beat heart rate, in 2 days you would probably be down to a fairly safe, comfortable 120 beats per minute.
I see. And if you wanted to intervene and make that even a quicker transition?
Oh, yeah. I've seen some people who just suddenly spontaneously became hyperthyroid, or who had overdosed. Juicing cabbage raw, it just takes a glass or two of that to very powerfully suppress your thyroid functions. It worked at several levels, but usually a glass or two a day for a couple of days, and the person is back down to normal.
And once you suppress... go ahead.
Well, liver is another suppressive food. If you eat 2 big meals of liver, you can see a big decrease in thyroid function.
And how long does that suppression last from liver or cabbage? If you eat something and say you're not hyperthyroid, you're just normal, whatever that is, and you eat some liver, how long does it take for your thyroid to bounce back? Is that also just a matter of a couple days?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the fear of suppressing your thyroid gland itself by taking too much thyroid, that has been tested by using isotopes that they could tell where the thyroid was coming from. So they would dose them until they could tell there was no thyroid being produced by their own gland. And then they stopped dosing them to see if there was any concern about prolonged suppression. And everyone's gland came right back in a couple of days.
Well, that's encouraging. So you can supplement your thyroid without fear of permanently taking it out of the system, which I think is what a lot of people are told if they talk to their doctor about it.
Yeah, and the farmers who had their own animals, often they would eat the thyroid gland in the chicken neck, for example. And one guy I knew said that on Friday they always had fried chicken in the field for lunch, and he said Friday afternoons he was always too hot to work, but he would eat 5 necks and get probably 20 grains of thyroid or so.
Oh, yeah.
A very suppressive dose, and you would be very hot, but by the next day it would have passed.
Huh. That'll get you moving. Is another thyroid question here from Wade. I would like to ask Ray's thoughts on reverse T3. If it is really necessary to use T3 treatment only to clear out the accumulated reverse T3, or if a combination thyroid product and proper nutrition will resolve the issue.
Yeah, I think it's mostly caused by high cortisol and stress hormones. And so just eating a good supportive diet, plenty of fruit, orange juice and milk, will help keep the stress down. And I think it works just as effectively as taking just small amounts of T3.
And what causes reverse T3? It's basically where your whole thyroid system shuts down. Is that right?
Yeah, if you if your body thinks that you're having an overexposure to thyroid, it gets rid of the excess by turning thyroxine into an inactive kind of T3. It takes off the wrong iodine, and so if you're fasting, for example, part of the thyroid is being excreted the way estrogen or toxins are being excreted all the time, but part of it is being inactivated in a way that has an anti-thyroid effect. It interferes with the active T3, so it's an extra fast way to turn off your thyroid function. Not just getting rid of the active stuff, but making a neutralizing, blocking form of the thyroid.
And I missed part of the question of the person who was concerned about MS, and that had to do with a drug to decrease the number of MS symptoms, and I think it's called, just can't find the word here, naloxone, or do you know what?
Yeah, naloxone or naltrexone.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
So, when you're under stress, you produce the endorphins, and the endorphins they compensate for injury or stress, and they should go away, but prolonged stress can leave you sort of inhibited in various ways with the wrong pattern of endorphins. And if a person has been exposed to prolonged stress, sometimes you can break out of that pattern and recover functions with an anti-morphine treatment. These naloxone and naltrexone are the injected and oral forms of an anti-opiate that simply keeps the morphine or the endorphin from having its effect, and sometimes that can restore functions that had been suppressed.
And it sounds like you've opined that you don't like opiates, or that you think they're actually bad for you in the long run, and so that sounds like it's not a bad thing to be taking.
Yeah, I think it usually has its effect in just a few days, though.
I see.
And I think if it hasn't really made a big difference in just a few days, then it's probably some other problem.
I see. So if you wanted to keep the inflammation low, could you just use some other anti-inflammatory?
Oh yeah. All kinds of stabilizing anti-inflammatory things. Thyroid and progesterone and the short-chain fatty acids and sugars are all things that help restore injured, demyelinated nerves.
Well, let me ask before I go into my own questions. And the phone number again is 802-526-2326, 802-526-2326, if anybody wants to call. And you can Skype me at John Barkhausen, all one word. Lilia asks, do you, Ray, have any thoughts on the efficacy of prolotherapy, in which a solution containing sugar in the form of dextrose is injected into tendons or ligaments to strengthen weakened connective tissue, tissue that was weakened as the result of injury? Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, yeah. My father had it done. I think they used vegetable oil in the 1950s. A combination of Novocaine and vegetable oil, I think, was the popular thing then. And it causes an inflammatory reaction and toughening up of the ligaments, and it can cure some back problems without anything very invasive, just a shot into the ligament. And so it's proven to work, but I think there are better things. It's usually a low DHEA production from low thyroid, high estrogen, and stress hormones that cause the ligaments and tendons to get weak. And the correcting the thyroid function and maybe taking a DHEA or pregnenolone supplement would be the natural way to strengthen the ligaments and tendons, and it helps the bones at the same time.
Okay. I guess the person who did this did find relief from it, and she'd been suffering for 35 years, so it sounds like there's a couple ways to fix that problem. And I was going to ask you, I know people wonder when they hear you talk. By the way, we are talking to Dr. Raymond Peat, who's a PhD in biology with a specialization in physiology from Eugene, Oregon, and he also has vast knowledge of science history. And we have about half an hour to go here at WMRW LP Warren. And we are having a fundraiser, by the way. I keep forgetting to mention it. But if you'd like to contribute to alternative radio, radio that doesn't have commercial conscriptions, feel free to do that at any time at WMRW.org. You can click the pig to make a PayPal or credit card donation. And we're trying to raise our $10,800 annual operating budget, which is not much money to run a radio station. And that's because nobody here is paid a salary. Thanks for putting up with that, Ray. Let's see. I wanted to ask you, a lot of times it sounds like all of our problems boil down to having a slow metabolism, or basically the engine that drives us and gives us all of our energy is not running well. And I've heard the complaint about your writings before that all he ever thinks is wrong with us is our thyroid, and somehow that's a put down. How do you respond to that?
Well, it doesn't apply just to people. It applies to all complex organisms practically. Mm-hmm. The difference between us and a fungus is that we've had a lot of thyroid and oxidative metabolism that the fungus hasn't benefited from. All of our functions are characterized by high energy oxidative metabolism, the brain more than any other part. And as you look at the animal kingdom, the outstanding thing is that their oxidative metabolism increases as they go up the so-called evolutionary scale. And it's that oxygen is driving our existence, and our existence is culminating in a bigger, more expensive brain that other animals couldn't afford because their thyroid function wasn't adequate. It's really the essential thing, given oxygen and sugar and a few other materials. Thyroid is the catalyst for making things run right.
Mm-hmm. And it's, when people complain that all you, and I don't think it's actually true, but when they say that all you talk about is the thyroid, they make it sound like you're not interested in any of the other systems of the body, but the thyroid does seem like the master system in terms of energy production for everything.
Yeah, and if your thyroid, for example, is working efficiently, then your pituitary doesn't have much to do, and you aren't likely to get a pituitary tumor. Your adrenals don't have much to do. Your ovaries don't get overstimulated. The other glands have an easy job when your thyroid is working right. If your thyroid gets interfered with, then you've got to rev up your adrenals, and then your pituitary becomes a commander-in-chief and tells everyone what to do.
With the stress hormones.
Yeah, and then you're at risk of getting tumors of the ovaries or testicles or adrenal glands or thyroid gland because your pituitary is working them too hard.
That's a good way to look at it. I also wanted to, in lieu of anybody else calling in, I have some questions about common problems. A lot of people have arthritis, and we've discussed that a little bit today. But in our shows about progesterone, you were talking about several instances where progesterone was very helpful to women with arthritis. But what about men? Is it the right substance to use for men in arthritis?
Yeah, one of the first people I gave it to was a friend over 40 years ago, I think, who every afternoon his knee swelled up, obviously rheumatoid arthritis. It looked like a football. And I just got some standard injectable progesterone from the drugstore, and he put the whole vial on, rubbed it from his side down to his calf. And 2 or 3 hours later, he was walking and showed me his knee was no longer swollen. And just about 3 or 4 years ago, he was still walking without a limp. I hadn't noticed arthritis in all that time.
So for people developing arthritis in their hands now, is that also a thyroid problem, do you think, or is it just some inflammation that could be taken care of with aspirin or progesterone?
Yeah, when your thyroid is down, you compensate with all kinds of other stress hormones. Your autonomic system goes up, but so does your adrenal, cortical, and aldosterone hormones. Estrogen increases, even melatonin gets involved. Everything runs to compensate when the thyroid is low, and some of these compensatory things don't quite compensate fully, and then they get involved in creating the inflammation. and that's where the DHEA and progesterone, either taken orally or can be applied topically, those are the things that are deficient, that as a consequence, the other more delicate and dangerous hormones such as estrogen and cortisol, those increase because you're low in progesterone, DHEA, and pregnenolone. And so supplementing any of those three or all three of them will usually alleviate or cure arthritis. I've known people with dogs or horses, they thought that the horse was so old that it would never work again. Mm-hmm. And just giving it progesterone, they made the horse healthy and happy for several more years. And people with dogs that basically couldn't walk around, couldn't get up on the furniture, they gave them pregnenolone or progesterone, and they were their normal test selves.
That's great. We have a caller. You're on the air, caller.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call. Ray, in your essay on autonomic systems, there's a little passage about 20th century writing and painting, and you talk about those things being considered expressive rather than communicative. I was wondering if you could give some examples of 20th century writers or painters who you think are communicative and not insane, and as someone maybe who is following in Blake's footsteps.
I missed several parts of those sentences. John, could you repeat them?
I'm not sure if I got them all either. Could you try again, caller, and I'll turn the volume up so maybe Ray will get it.
Okay, I'm sorry. It might be my cell phone's fault. I was just wondering if there are any 20th century writers or painters who you consider not insane, who you consider communicative rather than expressive. Oh. Maybe somebody who's following in Blake's footsteps.
Somebody who's following in Blake's footsteps.
Yeah. Siqueiros was one of my heroes, David Alfaro Siqueiros.
How do you spell that?
Siqueiros.
Okay, thanks.
And why did you originally say that, Ray, that the 20th century artists are considered to be out of their minds?
Well, they were driven out of their minds partly by the CIA's project called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which worked with Nelson Rockefeller to glorify some of the what Siqueiros called them, the ghost artists. They were creating a culture of anti-culture, and the CIA knew exactly what they were doing, and presumably Nelson Rockefeller did too, when he and his two or three other philanthropists concentrated on these people because of their antisocial consciousness. And they ridiculed the idea that art should have a social consciousness. And the CIA pumped Marshall Plan money into creating this alternative culture of abstract expressionism and such.
Sounds like we need to start a new show called Politics and Art. Yeah, corrupting influence of money everywhere. Do you have another comment, caller?
Okay, no, thank you. I'll get off now. Bye.
Okay, thanks for calling.
I'm not sure. I think it was just because Siqueiros was working around the New York crowd that he saw what was happening. It was years later before the actual facts became public. I think it was 1968 when this CIA financing of culture was revealed. But Siqueiros had been there seeing it going on. So he was the first person I heard of writing about the government's official ghost culture.
Yeah, that's. And what do you think the government's motive was for doing that, Ray? Was it just to divorce people from the
to improve the power? Yeah, to improve the power of the Rockefeller class by keeping anyone who said art should be socially conscious, show them to be some kind of degenerate or subversive.
We just got another email question in. It's to ask you what causes moles on the skin.
I'm not sure what you would say causes them, but I've, in myself and in several friends, I found that they were very hormonally related. In about 1980, one summer, I had been watching a mole grow on my belly, and it was obviously, to me, becoming a dangerous melanoma. It had grown from a little brown spot to one summer.
Hello?
Can you just keep it down while Ray answers this question? There's some. Turn off your mic for a second.
Okay.
It was becoming an obvious melanoma to me, and a couple of doctors who happened to be visiting that summer saw it and told me that they thought it was a melanoma. But around that time, I was experimenting with different steroids, and I just happened to be tasting some DHEA around that time, and without thinking of any connection, one night I noticed a shiny red dome on my belly where the mole had been, and over the next 3 or 4 days, the mole disappeared. And thinking about it, I realized that I had been sampling the DHEA around that time. So the next time I started getting a mole that looked like it was turning into a melanoma, for example, turning blue and white, and the blue and white spots swimming around or changing positions rapidly, typical behavior of a melanoma, I would just apply a little either progesterone or DHEA to that area, and immediately the color, instead of swimming around in colored spots, would level out and become just a little tan-colored thing, and then it would go away. And I had a series of experiments. One was a mole as big as a jumbo olive that when I finally put some progesterone near it, within 2 weeks it had turned to a crisp and fallen off without leaving a trace of a scar.
Wow. Where
this huge black thing had been. And I found that I could sort of steer them. They're extremely mobile, the pigment cells. A huge black thing appeared suddenly on my lower arm, and having the other experiences, I put a dot of progesterone in oil on the upside, about an inch from the spot.
Is that coconut oil?
The next day there were, I think it was vitamin E and progesterone.
Okay, thanks.
And the following day there was a shadow of it, about an inch downstream towards my hand, and I put another dot on, and each time I put a dot on, the next day there would be a shadow an inch farther down. So I had a series of 3 or 4 progressively fainter shadows, and each time a shadow moved out from it, the spot itself got fainter, and pretty soon all of the cells had walked away from the big black spot. And in another case, putting a dot on the front of one on my forehead, the pigment cells moved out in a circumference away from it. So it looked, on the third day, it looked like a bullseye. And after about a week, the original spot had shrunk up and pinched off at the base.
Wow.
And left no scar.
That's phenomenal.
Various other people who didn't experiment in such detail would just take an overdose of thyroid for a week or two, and day by day you could see their mole shrinking until, in one case, a mole an inch long disappeared from a guy's back in 2 weeks.
So you were just toying with it, with that progesterone and pregnenolone.
Yeah, very entertaining to see how fast these cells can run through your body.
Yeah.
People have studied them on cover slips, and at 90 degrees, which is the average skin temperature, a cell of that type can walk about an inch per day.
Wow.
If it's motivated.
if you've got something to move it along. No loitering.
Yeah.
We have
I think the reason they collect in certain spots is that they come looking for something that's missing from where they were.
They're looking for some resource to take advantage of, or?
Yeah, like they found some cell that was emitting DHEA possibly.
Oh.
And so everyone moved in to take advantage.
Huh. I see. And that's maybe what caused the mole to form in the first place.
Yeah, that's some people just the last couple of months have been thinking about the factors that guide cell migration, and it's probably going to be a very interesting field in the next few years, trying, for example, to lure cancer cells back from their metastatic positions, call them back to where they should be.
That sounds much more civilized than what they do now. We do have a caller, Ray, and not very much time left, so
okay.
Caller, if you want to turn on your mic.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. And what's your question?
I wanted to talk about type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome, and how it causes, goes together with low testosterone, and what's the best way to attack that.
Okay, we have about 7 minutes.
I've got some newsletters specifically on that, but getting the polyunsaturated fats out of your body as far as possible, or keeping them in storage if they're there, but definitely avoiding all kinds of polyunsaturated fats, because those are the things that specifically interfere with the ability to oxidize glucose. One of the reasons that aspirin for 100 years has been known to help lower blood sugar in that kind of diabetes is that aspirin does several things to interrupt the effects of the polyunsaturated fats. It keeps them from turning into the inflammation-causing prostaglandins, but it also helps to keep them in storage where they don't do any harm, or not so much harm.
All right. Caller, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you for that. And I wanted to know, would that also, correlate into the weight loss? Because I found that, as soon as weight is lost, the blood sugar starts regulating itself.
Yeah, the fat cells are sending out signals that create inflammation. Leptin is one of the pro-inflammatory signals that you want to signal your fat to stop sending leptin if possible.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for calling.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. We have one more question that came in by email, Ray, and it says, it's from Jerry. I eat raw vegetables out of the garden all summer. Is that a no-no? I always thought raw veggies were more nutritious than cooked.
It depends on what they are. Like peppers, for example, are really fruits. Tomatoes and peppers are good raw. Mm-hmm. And carrots and some of the radishes, for example, are, if you ate a lot of them, they would be anti-thyroid. But there are some things called vegetables that are really fairly rich in sugar as well as the minerals, and so those sweetish root vegetables are pretty healthy, and the fruits, tomatoes and bell peppers in particular.
Mm. As long as you're not nightshade intolerant.
Yeah. The allergy to those is a problem for a lot of people.
You're not very big on some raw vegetables, is that right? Like beans and such?
Yeah. The raw stuff, it's likely to feed bacteria and cause problems. And if there is a seed developing in it, that has other specific toxins.
Mm.
Like peas and beans are not so great.
Yeah. And I really wanted to ask you about eczema. I was wondering if you had any tips for how to handle that. We only have a couple minutes.
Keeping your intestine in good condition is one of the things. Both eczema and psoriasis tend to flare up in a lot of people when they eat bread or other grains. And beans are very hard on the intestine in general, but seeds, grains, and beans irritating the intestine tend to create sympathetic reactions. The particular enzyme that reacts to gluten is involved in the maturing of the skin cells, and so this particular enzyme is now being studied as a link between the intestine and the skin, the transglutaminase enzymes.
And what can somebody do about eczema if they have it?
Thyroid very often
helps.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Would progesterone also, do you think?
Yeah. Very often, sometimes pregnenolone, by balancing all of the others, it's the precursor to all of the steroid hormones, and in itself it stops the stress reaction. And to the extent that your stress system, from pituitary to adrenals, it associates with a flare-up of skin problems, just by turning off the stress with pregnenolone, you can see a big change in a lot of problems.
And, well, we're actually out of time, so I can't go on even though I want to. Dr. Raymond Peat, it's been a real pleasure once again having you on the show, and thanks for doing such a marathon and handling all those questions.
Oh, okay.
So well, really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, have a good night, Ray.
Okay, bye.
Yeah, bye-bye. Well, it's hard to believe that sped by so quickly. I want to thank everybody